On May 5th of 1945, the German soldiers in the occupied western region of the Netherlands finally surrendered and were forced to literally walk home. The Dutch population that had been in the midst of famine that was induced by the occupiers was finally free. This is how it happened. By May of 1945, Berlin had fallen and Hitler was dead. But in Western Netherlands, a strange and terrible stagnation held firm. Over 4 million Dutch civilians were trapped in Fortress Holland, held by the German 25th Army. In September of 1944, the Dutch government in exile in London called for a general railway strike to assist Allied forces in their liberation efforts. In retaliation, the German occupation forces imposed a blockade on food and fuel shipments to the western provinces of the Netherlands, which were still under German control. Fast forward to 1945, and the situation behind German lines was catastrophic. This was the tail end of what came to be known as the Hunger Winter. People were eating tulip bulbs to survive. The death toll from starvation was mounting into the thousands. To the east, the Canadian First Army stood ready. In this footage, we see members of the Canadian Signal Corps setting up a communication line to the Germans in the Netherlands in order to organize the negotiated surrender of German forces. But the situation on the ground was complicated. They could have swept in, but at a terrible cost. A full-scale invasion of the Netherlands would have meant the Germans blowing the dikes, flooding the country, and more Dutch civilians dying in the crossfire. On May 4th, 1945, at Lunenburg Heath in Germany, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery accepted the surrender of all German forces in northwest Germany, Denmark, and, crucially, the Netherlands. But the local surrender, the one that would actually stop the fighting, had to be negotiated on the ground. The truth is that the Germans' negotiating leverage was the millions of Dutch that they were holding hostage. But it was also clear that the Germans had lost the war. May 5th, 1945, Wageningen, a small town on the banks of the Rhine, is a shell of its former self. For months, it has sat on the front line, a no-man's land, between the Allied liberators and occupying German forces. But today, the guns are silent. Today, the world holds its breath as 3 cars approach a scarred brick building, the Hotel de Wereld. Why this hotel? It was one of the few buildings left standing with enough dignity to host a surrender. It had been damaged by shelling, its windows boarded up, but it remained a symbol. At 11 a.m., Lieutenant-General Charles Foulkes, commander of the 1st Canadian Corps, arrives. He is a man of few words, carrying the weight of the brutal famine that has just claimed thousands of Dutch lives. Minutes later, a staff car from the German-occupied side arrives, containing Generaloberst Johannes Blaskowitz, commander of the German 25th Army, and his chief of staff. Blaskowitz is a career soldier, a man who once protested German atrocities in Poland. Yet he finds himself here, at the end of the road, tasked with surrendering the last German stronghold in the western Netherlands. Representing the Dutch resistance and the royal family is Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. Wearing his British RAF uniform, his presence is a pointed reminder to the Germans that the nation that they tried to dominate is once again very much independent. Blaskowitz asks for 24 hours to communicate the terms to his troops. Foulkes refuses. The Allied advance will not wait. However, the primary focus of this meeting isn't just military, it's humanitarian. The Netherlands is starving. The hunger winter had reduced rations to as little as 500 calories per day. Foulkes makes it clear the German army must facilitate the immediate entry of food convoys. The document of capitulation is laid out. It's a simple piece of paper, but it carries the fate of 120,000 German soldiers and millions of Dutch civilians. Outside, crowds of Dutch civilians begin to gather, sensing that something monumental is happening behind these scarred walls. The meeting at Hotel de Wereld is a preliminary one, the technical surrender. It takes hours to hammer out the logistics, where the Germans will stack their arms, how they will be marched back to Germany, and the handover of the vital Atlantic Wall coastal defenses. The news spreads like wildfire as Canadian supply trucks immediately begin delivering huge quantities of food to the population. In Wageningen, the silence is broken by a low murmur that turns into a roar. The Dutch national anthem begins to rise from the streets. People come out of their homes, thin and haggard, but with a light in their eyes that hadn't been seen since 1940. The surrender at Wageningen was more than a military maneuver. It was the beginning of Liberation Day. But the aftermath was bittersweet. The German soldiers began their long walk home, disarmed and defeated. For the Dutch, the celebration was tempered by the sheer scale of the loss. The Canadian liberators became instant heroes. To this day, the bond between the Netherlands and Canada remains unshakable, rooted in the signatures to the German capitulation in Wageningen. General Blaskowitz would never see a peaceful Germany. He would later take his own life while awaiting trial at Nuremberg. A follow-up production will cover the German soldiers' grueling 500-kilometer trek back to Germany, remembered as the Long Walk. If you like productions like this created from primary historical sources, please take the time to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Patreon supporters get regular access to exclusive footage that can't be shown here. Open a free account on our website military1945.com and stay informed. Thanks for watching.